Who are they and why do they come? Are they indeed refugees fleeing persecution and war and famine? Or are they economic migrants looking for a more comfortable life and basically being able to multiply their salary by, say, a factor of 5? Now, whether the people coming are refugees or economic migrants or a combination of the two, it's illegal either way. They are illegal immigrants either way. They're breaking the law and coming to Britain without permission. Now, if we're trying to work out why these people are coming, there are two sources of information that are not really very useful at all. The first one is the technical term asylum seekers. Now, if someone arrives on a small boat illegally, let's say, they can fill a form in to apply for asylum, and then once that form is filled in, technically speaking, they are an asylum seeker. But that does not mean that their motivation was to flee war or persecution or whatever, to seek asylum. And even if they're granted asylum status, it doesn't necessarily mean that that was the reason why they came. So the technical classifications of someone as an asylum seeker is pretty meaningless, really. And the other source of information about the motivation of these illegal immigrants is self-report. If you ask people, why have you come? It's obviously in their interest to tell the story that's going to enable them to reach their goal. People are not going to arrive and say, well, I'm an illegal immigrant, I know I'm making the law, I just want to stay here because I can earn a lot more money and to get my family over as well because we really like the lifestyle here. No one's going to say that. So self-report is very unhelpful as well. So it's quite difficult to know what's going on, but there has been some credible, reputable research done in the area, and I'm just going to summarize some of the findings here. So here we go. So from 2018 to 2024, citizens of 6 countries, Iran, Afghanistan, Iraq, Albania, Syria and Eritrea, have made up 70% of those crossing in small boats. Now this is presented as though this is, solid factual evidence. I'm not so sure here though, because some of those countries are countries where people would have reason to flee. They're countries where there's persecution, for example. But might it not be the case that people are saying they're from these countries in order to be granted asylum? Are they actually from these countries? Now, what percentage of people arriving on small boats have got a passport or some sort of official identification papers to prove where they're from? What percentage have got that? Well, somewhere in the region of 2%. So about 98% of people crossing the small boats have basically deliberately destroyed their ID documents. And why would that be? I mean, surely the only reason to do that is because the story you're going to tell actually isn't true. They're wanting to cover up the facts of the matter. Now, just before moving on, I'll just mention a bit about Albanians. There was a massive spike in illegal immigration from Albania around 2022. But then the UK government sort of got a grip of it and started deporting a lot of them back to Albania. So you can see the graph here, the turquoise bar shows the number of deportations to Albania. So very chunky bars there in 2023, 2024. What did that do to the number of Albanians crossing in small boats? Well, look at this graph. You can see that after the massive peak, it just virtually disappears. So that seemed to do the trick. Anyway, moving on. Between 2018 and 2024, the asylum grant rate for people who arrived illegally by small boat was 68% higher than the grant rate for all asylum applicants. So if people arrive illegally in a small boat, the chance of claiming asylum overall, well, it's pretty decent. Pretty decent. Right, another factor as well here, increased enforcement of other unauthorised routes and the professionalism of smuggling gangs have contributed to the rise of small boat crossings. So why are people crossing in small boats? Well, because other means of smuggling yourself into the UK have been made more difficult. Remember a few years ago, it would be trucks with people stowing away in trucks, this sort of thing. They've got better at detecting that. Heat detectors, carbon dioxide detectors, etc., etc. So they've tended to tighten up on other means of entering the UK illegally, which has meant people have chosen small boats as what is currently, in the marketplace of options, the best option. Cost, by the way, you hear about these people smugglers. How much does it cost to get into the UK illegally in a small boat? Well, sometimes around £3,000 seems to be the market rate at the moment. Right, 2024, 37,000 people were detected crossing the English Channel in small boats. How many crossed undetected, not sure. 2025 is increasing on that, it looks like. Right, the majority of people arriving in small boats, men over the age of 18, about 76%. Another 14% were under the age of 18. So 90% were either adult men or under 18s. So adult women, 10%, we assume. So very, very small proportion. We'll talk about why that is later. Right, what proportion of them applied for asylum, or applied for asylum like through a dependent? Well, 99%. So basically every single one of them that arrives illegally on a small boat applies for asylum, fills in the form, gets a lawyer, starts going through that process. Now, which nationalities or claimed nationalities tend to have asylum granted? Well, Syrians, Eritreans, Sudanese got a pretty good rate. Albanians, Iraqis, Vietnamese, Turks, Indians, a less high rate of acceptance. Now, if you're a refugee in the Middle East, the easy and local option is to go to Jordan and Turkey, and you've got a very good chance of finding somewhere to stay because there's a lot of facilities there, a lot of money spent there looking after refugees. So Jordan and Turkey are the local options. So people choosing to come to the UK are declining the local options in most cases, the local options of Jordan and Turkey, and choosing instead to travel all the way across Europe to try and get into the United Kingdom. Right, since 2018 to 2024, 5,000 people who arrived by small boat have been returned from the UK by the end of 2024. That's around 3% of all arrivals. 3%. So again, your odds are pretty good. Your chance of being deported is minimal. Right, in 2024, 73 people died crossing the English Channel by small boat, more than in the previous 6 years combined. And there's probably cases that don't get registered either, so that's probably an understatement. That's very sad. Reasons for that, probably boats being used beyond their capacity. And also a reason for the increased death toll is better enforcement, particularly in France. So taking your boat to the beach for the shortest crossing at during the daytime, at the best time of year, that's increasingly difficult. So the people smugglers are tending to say, we can't go from the best place. We're going to have to go from a beach a bit further away. We're going to have to go from some distance inland on a canal or a river. And this makes the journey more dangerous. Now, I think that fact cannot influence policy. Lots of measures make crimes more dangerous. In fact, lots of measures are intended to make crimes more dangerous. So the increased death toll is in large part a consequence of better enforcement. And we still need to enforce the law as well as we can. And if people try ever harder to break it, well, really the risk is on their heads. Right, people may choose to seek asylum in the UK for a variety of reasons. Now we're now getting to the heart of the matter. So the Oxford University Centre that monitors this says there is limited evidence on why Channel migrants decide to come to the UK. That's interesting, isn't it? Such a fundamental question. And yet the leaders in the field are saying we don't really know that much about it, partly for the reasons I stated at the beginning. It's very difficult to actually know why people are coming when you can't trust what they're saying. But one thing they can look at is they could look at people are coming from which nations, and are there things going on in that nation, instability, war, persecution, that would justify or motivate people to leave. And that does tend to be a factor. But of course, we're trusting the people saying where they come from, and they may not actually come from those countries, so that's difficult. But it does seem to be the case that conflict, instability, etc. does lead people to seek asylum in the United Kingdom, to cross in small boats to seek asylum in the United Kingdom. That's what might have prompted the beginning of their journey. Not why they ended up in the United Kingdom, but prompted them to leave the country of origin. The other huge factor we've got to consider, of course, is wealth. If you're from a poor country, coming to a wealthy country like the United Kingdom, your salary can multiply by 5 or multiply by 10. and you have a lifestyle completely beyond your wildest dreams in the home nation. So that's a big pull factor as well. So, and those two factors interact with each other as well. So why is it generally men that come over on the small boats? The reason it's men, two reasons. One reason is the family wants to come to the UK, but they send the man first because it's a long, dangerous journey. Send the man first. He can apply for asylum. If he gets it, then they can then say, right, family reunification, the rest of my family can come too. They're in the same situation in the same country, so they should be able to come. And the odds of getting that are pretty good under the current system. Another reason to send, a man, particularly a youngish man, could be, we'll send a young man over, he can earn money and send money back to us. And he might be working in a car wash, and we would think that's not very much money, but the money he sends back could be life-changing in a poor country. So that is another motivation. In some cases, the rest of the family is left in like a refugee camp in, say, Jordan or Turkey. So they've left their country of origin for genuine refugee reasons. They've gone to, say, Jordan or Turkey, and they are refugees. But instead of staying in those countries, they want to come to the UK for a better life. So are they asylum seekers? Are they fleeing persecution or hardship? Well, yes, but that doesn't justify why they come to the UK. They want to come to the UK for reasons of wealth, lifestyle, just to improve their standard of living. Now, other reasons that draw people to the United Kingdom in particular, they've got friends and family members here. Now, that's what tends to happen with immigration. The more people you have from a certain part of the world, certain country, certain culture, the more people will want to come and join them because it will be a lower barrier. They'll already know people here to come and meet. Now, I would say that as well, ultimately, it still comes down to wealth. Why were the friends and family members here? Well, they came here for a better life because Britain is a wealthier country. Other reasons, similar to that, as well as families and friends, just communities. If you've got, let's say, for example, a huge community of people from Afghanistan, then if you're an Afghan, you're thinking, right, where shall I go and live in a rich country? Well, it'd be great to go and live somewhere where there's lots of Afghans already who speak the language. I can just go and fit in. There won't be a big cultural barrier. So the more Afghans you've got in the country, the more Afghans are going to tend to come, for example. So that's another reason that draws people to the United Kingdom. Some people as well, they can speak a bit of English. So they might think, I want to go to a rich European country. France, I can't speak a word. That would be quite difficult. English, I know a little bit. I'll try and get to the UK. Another factor as well is sometimes I'll go to the people smugglers, maybe not in Calais, on the other side of Europe, and they might say, okay, this is the package we've got. This is our package deal. We can get you to the UK for this much money. And people might say, okay, but that's what I'll go for then. That's the package I will adopt. I think a lot of illegal immigrants look at the UK as safe and welcoming, or soft touch as other people might see it, and they might have experiences in other European countries where they feel things are quite tough. The authorities are tough, the system's quite tough on them, and they're not feeling particularly welcome. They may be right or wrong about how things are going to work out in the UK, but sometimes they just want to try somewhere else. A lot of migrants apparently underestimate the risks of the journey and overestimate their chances of being granted asylum. Now that's interesting because the risks of crossing the channel in a small boat are actually not that enormous, and the chance of getting asylum is actually pretty good. But still, apparently, they do underestimate the risks and overestimate the chance of being granted asylum. Another reason, apparently, that draws illegal immigrants to the UK is that they believe that the informal economy in the UK is bigger. In other words, it's easier to work in the grey economy. So you don't have to have a national insurance number. You can work basically illegally. And they think it's easier to do that in the UK than it is in, for example, France. Now, then that actually isn't true. The size of the informal economy in the UK isn't as great as it is in a lot of other European countries. I think maybe the fact that you have ID cards in some other countries makes immigrants think it's harder to work in those countries compared to the UK, but I think actually it probably isn't. Now, in terms of working out people's motivations as well, how things work out with asylum. It's really important, I think, to bear in mind that when someone applies for asylum, you get a lawyer. You get an asylum lawyer who's on your side to help you present your case, to tell your story in order to be granted asylum. Now, does this lawyer help people to present their story, or do they help them to make up their story? And I think it's very hard to tell the difference. Because if someone says, right, this is my case for applying for asylum, the lawyer will say, okay, that's fine, but we need a bit more about why you can't just move to another part of the country, for example. So have you got anything about that? Or have you got any stories about when you were mistreated by the police or by your family or by whatever? So they're just prompting, they're saying to people, this is the sort of story you need to have. And so in many cases, these people who are desperate to get into the UK, I'm sure, will make up the story that they think is necessary to be granted asylum. Now, I'm going to show you a little bit of a clip from a video here. This is from an organisation called Rainbow Migration, which is funded by the Home Office, in other words, funded by our taxes. And it's designed to help transgender people draft their asylum applications. And helpfully, it's provided with Albanian subtitles. So, just watch this.
And so you need to be clear with your lawyer and with the Home Office about what your gender identity is and what your issues are around expressing your gender identity. Let's have a think about some questions that might help you when you're writing your statement, and they'll help you to prepare for what questions the Home Office might ask you. So perhaps the starting place might be, when did you first perceive your own identity as it is now? Maybe that's a very recent thing. Maybe that's how you always felt. Would you be able to live in your gender identity in the way that you want to? If not, what would be constraining you? What's going to be stopping you from doing that? And how that would make you feel. Those are really important things, because being a refugee and claiming asylum is about what will happen to you if you go back in future. So if the problem is from your government, that might extend across the whole of your country. But if it's just from your family or your local community, then you need to explain why you couldn't be safe by simply going somewhere else in the country, away from them.
So what do you think that video is doing? Does that give the impression that it's trying to help people to tell their stories, or is it helping people to know what stories they need to tell? What stories they need to concoct? I think, well, what do you think? So to conclude, why do people come to Britain on small boats? Well, there's significant uncertainty, but some things seem pretty clear. There are two motivations. One motivation is just wealth. Move to a wealthier country and be able to bring your family to a wealthier country. And the other type might be people who had good reason to need to leave the country where they were living, but the reason why they come to the UK is wealth. They want to move to a wealthy country. What applies in virtually no cases is the reason they're applying for asylum in the UK or have come to the UK illegally is just because they needed to flee the country where they are. The wealth factor is virtually always there as well. And if they're coming to join family or a diaspora community, again, that's wealth. Why is that community there? They've moved here because it's a richer country. So what needs to happen? Obviously, illegal immigration needs to be stopped. I think if we had a system where you could apply for asylum from outside the UK, it just wouldn't work. It would be overwhelmed. There would be literally hundreds of millions of applications. There'd be no way of checking if they're honest or not, and just the system would be totally unmanageable. So the way forward in terms of offering refuge to people who genuinely need it, I think the sensible way to do that is what the UK government has done in some particular cases, for example with Hong Kong and Ukraine, is to say in this particular situation we are going to grant refugee status to a certain number of people, sort of by invitation through international cooperation, and we'll take in some refugees from this particular trouble spot. In some cases maybe on a temporary basis until the problems have passed. That's the way it needs to be. Right, do get your tickets for the Scottish Family Party Conference, 8th of November in Glasgow. There's a link below. Hope what I had to say in this video was interesting and enlightening. Do like and subscribe, and see you next time.